What if the one thing standing between an entire nation and genocide was a young orphan girl who just happened to become queen? No army, no weapon, just wisdom, courage, and perfect timing. This is the story of Esther, and by the end, you're going to understand why this story still changes lives thousands of years later. The book of Esther reads like a thriller. There's a king, a villain, a hidden identity, a death sentence, and a last-minute reversal that nobody saw coming. But underneath all the drama is one of the most powerful life lessons ever recorded. So let's get into it. We're in ancient Persia. King Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes, is one of the most powerful rulers on earth. He throws a massive banquet that lasts 180 days. Yes, you heard that right. 6 months of celebrating his own wealth and power. At the end of it, he calls for his queen, Vashti, to come display her beauty in front of his guests. She refuses, and just like that, she's removed from her position. Now the king needs a new queen. So a kingdom-wide search begins, and young women from across the empire are brought to the palace. Here's where our story really begins. There's a young Jewish woman named Esther. She's an orphan, raised by her older cousin Mordecai after losing both her parents. She has nothing, no title, no power, no connections. But she has character, and sometimes that's everything. Esther is brought to the palace along with many other young women, and something about her is different. She wins the favor of every single person she meets, not by being loud or flashy, but by being humble, wise, and genuinely kind. Eventually, King Ahasuerus chooses her above all others. Esther becomes queen. But here's the twist. On Mordecai's advice, she never reveals that she is Jewish. She keeps that part of her identity hidden, and that secret is going to matter more than anyone knows. Lesson 1. Your background doesn't disqualify you. Esther was an orphan with no status, and she still ended up in the most influential seat in the kingdom. Where you start is not where you have to finish. Haman, he's been promoted to the highest position in the king's court, second only to the king himself. And he loves it. He expects everyone to bow down to him wherever he goes. And everyone does, except one man, Mordecai. Every single day, Mordecai refuses to bow because as a Jewish man, he bows only to God. This drives Haman absolutely crazy. But instead of just dealing with Mordecai, Haman decides to go bigger, much bigger. He goes to the king and convinces him to issue a royal decree in order to wipe out every single Jewish person in the entire Persian Empire. The king agrees without even fully understanding what he's signing. Haman even casts lots, called Purim, to choose the perfect day to carry out the massacre. When Mordecai finds out, he is devastated. He tears his clothes, puts on sackcloth, and mourns openly. And when Esther hears about it, she sends a messenger to find out what's going on. Mordecai sends Esther a message. He tells her exactly what Haman has planned, and then he says something that stops her cold. He tells her, "You need to go to the king. You need to plead for your people." And Esther is terrified. Because here's the thing. In Persia, nobody approaches the king without being summoned. Not even the queen. Anyone who does can be put to death on the spot, unless the king chooses to extend his golden scepter and spare them. And Esther hasn't been called to see the king in 30 days. She pushes back. She reminds Mordecai of the risk. And his response? One of the most quoted lines in all of Scripture. He says, "Do not think that because you are in the king's house you alone of all the Jews will escape. If you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" For such a time as this. In other words, maybe everything you've been through, every door that opened, every favor you received, wasn't just for you. Maybe you were positioned exactly here, for exactly this moment. Your position is not just a privilege, it's a responsibility. The gifts, the opportunities, the influence you have were not given to you just for your comfort. They were given to you so you could do something that matters. Esther makes her decision. She asks Mordecai to gather all the Jewish people to fast for 3 days on her behalf. She and her servants will do the same. And then she says 5 words that echo through history. "If I perish, I perish." She's not being reckless. She's not being dramatic. She has counted the cost. She knows what could happen, and she chooses to move forward anyway. Courage is not the absence of fear. Esther was afraid. She said so, but she acted anyway. Real courage is doing the right thing even when you're scared, even when the outcome isn't guaranteed. On the third day, Esther puts on her royal robes and walks into the king's inner court. The king sees her and extends the golden scepter. She's safe. He even asks her what she wants, telling her he'll give her up to half his kingdom. But Esther doesn't blurt out her request. Instead, she invites the king and Haman to a banquet. Then another banquet. She's patient. She's strategic. She's building the moment. Meanwhile, Haman is on top of the world until he walks past Mordecai, and Mordecai still won't bow. Filled with rage, Haman goes home and builds a massive gallows, 75 feet high, specifically to hang Mordecai. He plans to ask the king for permission in the morning. But that night, the king can't sleep. He has his royal records read to him, and he hears the account of how Mordecai once uncovered a plot to assassinate him and saved his life. The king asks, what honor has been given to Mordecai for this? And the answer is, nothing. The next morning, Haman arrives at the palace early to ask about hanging Mordecai. But before he can say a word, the king asks him, what should be done for a man the king delights to honor? Haman, convinced the king is talking about him, describes an elaborate, public celebration. And the king says, great, go do exactly that for Mordecai the Jew. The look on Haman's face must have been something. At the second banquet, the king asks Esther again what she wants. And this time, she's ready. She reveals everything. She tells the king that she and her people have been condemned to destruction. The king demands to know who is responsible, and Esther points directly at Haman. The king is furious. He steps out to the garden to collect himself. Haman, now terrified, throws himself at Esther's feet to beg for his life. And the king walks back and right at that moment and thinks Haman is attacking the queen. It's over for Haman.
He is taken away and hanged on the very gallows he built for Mordecai. The trap you set for others has a way of finding you. Haman's pride, his hatred, his scheming, it all came back on his own head. What you put out into the world has a way of returning to you. Now there's still the decree, the order to kill all the Jews. Under Persian law, a royal decree cannot simply be undone. But the king allows a second decree to be issued, giving Jewish people throughout the empire the right to arm and defend themselves. And they do, successfully. Mordecai is elevated to Haman's former position. Esther's people are saved. And the Jewish community celebrates their deliverance with feasting and joy, a celebration that becomes the annual holiday of Purim, still observed to this day. So what does the story of Esther teach us? It teaches us that your origin story doesn't write your ending. Esther was an orphan, and she became a queen who saved a nation. It teaches us that favor follows character. Esther didn't fight or scheme her way to the top. She simply showed up with integrity, and doors opened. It teaches us that silence in the face of injustice is never truly safe. Mordecai told Esther, staying quiet won't protect you, and it won't protect any of us. It teaches us that courage isn't fearlessness, it's faithfulness under pressure. And most of all, it teaches us that your life has a purpose bigger than your own comfort. You may be exactly where you are, in that job, in that community, in that relationship, for such a time as this. The question is, what will you do with it? If this video blessed you, share it with someone who needs to hear Esther's story today. And if you want more deep dives into biblical stories that still speak to real life, subscribe, because we've got a lot more coming. I'll see you in the next one.